I'm excited about today's message. I've been working on this all week, as I do, but I'm especially pumped to share Daniel 6 with you today. It's a story that, if you've been around church, you know well. It's about Daniel in the lion's den. We're going to read through this, almost the entire story. There's one section that I'll summarize because it repeats it twice, so I won't read it both times. But this series is all about standing up, having a backbone, being tough, and fighting for what you believe in. And not giving in to pressures either from the outside or pressures from the inside. Toughness more and more is becoming toxic. And weakness more and more is becoming praiseworthy. But I just want to tell you, it's tough people that build. It's tough people that leave a legacy. It's tough people who fight good fights and overcome. They're not mean people, but they just have this toughness on the inside of them that says, no matter what happens, no matter what comes, I'm going to be faithful to my God. I'm going to be faithful to my family. I'm going to stand for what I believe. And if anybody else misunderstands, that's not on me. I'm gonna be tough as nails. Living for God, standing up for your family, for your spouse, for your children. In this world, more and more, it's going to require toughness. And so Daniel is a great book to talk about toughness because they are constantly being tested in the book of Daniel. Either Daniel himself or his friends, constantly being tested, constantly having to stand up for what they believe in and what they stand for. And so I'm excited to talk you through a familiar story and point out a few things that I think when we read the story, we can rush past or brush past and never really draw out and apply to our lives. But there's much to be learned from these stories. These are not kids' stories. These are eternal stories that have implications for us today. So we're talking about being tough as nails, and we're going to read from Daniel chapter number 6, verses 1, 2, 3, and 4 to get us started. And if you would, right here at the beginning, join me in standing if you're able. I would appreciate it. We're going to read the first 4 verses. We're going to pray, and then we're going to jump in to the rest of the message. Daniel chapter number 6, verse number 1. Says, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps. Pause. And I'm not going to stop every line, but something different, something has changed here. Something has changed. We talked about Belshazzar, however you want to say his name, last week. The very last line in Daniel 5 says that Belshazzar essentially died at the end of his party, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom that night. So now we're not talking about Nebuchadnezzar or Belshazzar's Babylon. We're talking about Darius and Cyrus's Medo-Persian Empire. So it's the next one, right? So it went from Babylonians to Persians. History tells us it goes from Persians to Greeks, and then it'll go from Greeks to Romans, right? Those are the 4 great empires in Europe from this day. So we are in the second empire now. Darius is in charge. Now, Darius is either Cyrus the Great of Persia, who we know from history, or he's so it's the Medo-Persian Empire. It's a big empire, Persia, and a small empire, the Medes. This is either the leader of the Medes who serves under Cyrus, or this is another name for Cyrus. That's a lot of information, but just remember it's a new kingdom. Not just a new king, a new kingdom. Everything is changing. The way they're doing government is changing. Everything is different at the beginning of Daniel 6:1. So it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials. So he has like 120 mayors, and he sets over them 3 governors, right? 3 people to manage those 120. One of those 3 was Daniel, to whom the satrap should give an account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel, who by the way is in his 80s at this point, Daniel became distinguished above all. If you're reading a paper Bible, underline that, circle that, highlight it. If you're on your phone, highlight that. Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful, and no error and no fault was found in him. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that as we get into the word today, that you would illuminate Scripture, that you would help us to understand what's written on those pages, and not just understand what's in the book, but how it applies to our life. We need your Holy Spirit, so we invite your Holy Spirit to fill this room, fill my mouth, fill our hearts today. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be seated. Everybody loves a good underdog story. Everybody loves a story about, it's what most movies are about, if you ever take note. Somebody who's not supposed to win overcomes all odds and they win. We love those stories, right? So I was thinking, like, what would be a good underdog story? I thought about the movie Rocky, and I mean, that'd be fun to talk about Rocky and maybe play the song. And I'd get up here and act a fool for a minute and dance around. But as I was thinking about it, I actually came across a story that's pretty relevant to the current times. And it's about a guy who is an athlete. He's the current UFC heavyweight champion. His name's Francis Nganu. Does anybody watch MMA or UFC? This is the heavyweight champion of the world. I think we have a picture. You guys can go ahead and throw it up. He looks like me. Y'all see? But I was reading about his story this week. The guy was born in a small village in Cameroon. And he was born to a family. His father was abusive. His father was a criminal, a street fighter, and brought a lot of that anger and aggression home, beat up on his mom. And by the age of 6, his parents were divorced, and he went to live with his aunt and his grandmother. And again, these are remote villages in Cameroon, and so these are dirt floor homes and huts and no education, very little money. So at the age of 10, he went to go work in sand quarries, literally hard physical labor for 10, 12 hours a day from the age of 12 till the age of 26. And after I read his story, I went and watched a YouTube video of him telling his story. And he talked about how at the age of 26, he just decided that I have to get somewhere with some opportunity because I can't keep just surviving. Working in a sand quarry with little to no education, no way to make money. The interviewer said, well, who was your inspiration? He said, I didn't have an inspiration. I just knew I had to not just survive. So he said, I packed a backpack and I started making my way to Europe. The guy said, well, where were you going? He said, I didn't know. I just took my backpack and went to the train station and started a journey to Europe. And it took him 14 months on trains, hitchhiking, literally walking across the desert in Algeria. Once he got caught just on the other side of the desert and dropped back off in the desert in Algeria. And for 14 months with just a backpack, no money, no connections, no friends, he makes his way to Morocco and then eventually catches a boat into Spain. And he gets into Spain, and as soon as he gets off the boat in Spain, he's arrested at the border and put in jail for 2 months for crossing into Europe illegally. After 2 months in jail, now he's almost 28. It took him 14 months to get here. He gets dropped out in Spain, and he begins to make his way to France because he knew if you fought for a living, France, they have gyms and this kind of thing. So he gets to Paris, and he's homeless for a year. Literally homeless, not poor, homeless, sleeping on benches, sleeping in parks, and working at a homeless kitchen in the kitchen. And while there, talking about his dream to become a professional fighter, he's 28, which is far too old to just now be working on your athletic dreams, right? He hears about a gym, and the gym owner just happens to be from the same country, Cameroon, as him. And so he goes to that gym, and he begins to tell the guy his story and how he's crossed over and just his whole life story. And so the guy, feeling a connection, says, hey, you can live in the gym and train in the gym if you work in the gym. So he begins training, and he's a monster of a man like me. 6'4", 250 pounds. I mean, just so when he begins training, people begin to take note. And just a few short years later, a few months ago, he knocked out the champion to become the heavyweight champion of the world as far as MMA is concerned. And I was listening to him talk about how now, because as a child working in the sand quarries, he had no role model, he had no inspiration, that he goes home and he's building gyms across Cameroon and building schools to try to teach kids a skill other than just working out in the dirt for 10 and 12 hours a day. I thought, man, what a story. How amazing is that in the day we live in, this is within the last 10 years, all of this kind of happened. That somebody can literally start from the bottom and rise up to the highest heights in the field that he's chosen to pursue. And I began to think, we don't all have that story. Our stories are not all that dramatic, but we all have a story of overcoming. We all have times in our life where it looked like the deck was stacked against us, and yet through faith and grit, determination, one way or another, we fought the good fight, we pushed back against the pressure, and we overcame. Come on, does anybody know what I'm talking about? We can look at times of loss or of grief. Maybe you were raised in a broken situation or an abusive situation, or you just maybe missed out on your childhood. And to hear him tell, he's like, I didn't have a childhood. And as he's talking, you can sense the pain. Even the interviewer was like, well, man, but I'm sure that created some kind of grit and strength in you. He said, there was nothing good in my childhood. It's heartbreaking. And maybe you're here today and you say, you look back at that chapter of your life and there's a void. And yet here you are, you've crossed a desert or two, you've faced some difficulties, and you're still on your 2 feet, you still have your right mind, you've overcome some battles, and not just in the past, but there's a lot of us right now. And we're looking at situations that feel out of control, that feel that they are too big, that we're supposed to lose in this situation. Maybe you've got a diagnosis or something that is threatening your life, or there's an addiction that's threatening your health, your mental health, or your family. I don't know what it is, but I do want to tell you that even if it looks like you're supposed to lose, it doesn't mean you have to lose. It doesn't mean all hope is lost. Everybody loves an underdog story, and there's an underdog in every one of us. And so today, I want to talk to you from this idea, how to win when you're supposed to lose. How to win when you're supposed to lose. Daniel was supposed to lose. Daniel was kidnapped and taken from his family as a young teenager, 13, 14, 15 years old. He was brought into Babylon, taken from Judah, Israel, brought into what is now Iraq, and raised, never sees his family again, never sees his homeland again, never lives in a culture that was familiar to him again. He's born to lose, and yet he wins. He excels. He overcomes. He succeeds. He finds favor when he's not supposed to find favor. He overcomes when he's not supposed to overcome. He succeeds when he's not supposed to succeed. So that by the time he's in his 80s, he is named, and we read it last week, third in charge over the entire kingdom of Babylon. However, that was short-lived, because a few minutes after he's named third in the kingdom falls. And there's a new king. And there's a new kingdom. And everything changes again. He spent 70 years learning the Babylonian way of doing things. And now there's a Persian king. And there's Persian ways of doing things. And there's a new language to learn. And there's new laws to learn. There's a new government to learn. But one way or another, Cyrus and Darius knew this guy is something special. And so they give him a privileged position in their new government. He is one of 3 managers over 120 managers. So he's one of 3 administrators over 120 administrators. And what happens is he does his job so well. Remember, he's in his 80s at this point, but he's outworking everybody. He's got more wisdom than everybody. And he begins to excel in another kingdom when he's not supposed to excel. So much so that the new king has ideas of naming him to be not just one of 3 over or number 3 over, but to be over the day-to-day affairs of the entire kingdom. Now, how does Daniel keep winning? How does Daniel keep overcoming? Two things, and we read them. Daniel 6:3. The first reason he always excels, he always wins when he's supposed to lose, is because he has an excellent spirit. Do you see that? An excellent spirit was in him. Didn't matter what was going on around him, Daniel approached everything with an excellent spirit. And so he constantly won when the odds were stacked against him. And the second reason is because he was faithful. He was faithful. Daniel 6:4, he was faithful. He was faithful to his duties, and he was faithful to his God. How do you win when you're supposed to lose? Have an excellent spirit and be a faithful man or woman. Let's read the rest and talk about each of those for a few moments. The first one was Daniel had an excellent spirit. What is excellence? Mark 7:37 says that people who watched Jesus do what he did were amazed because they said, he does everything well. That's excellence. You need a quick, easy definition for excellence? Do everything well. I want you to see, they weren't amazed in this moment because he raised people from the dead. They weren't amazed in this moment because he blew their mind with amazing teaching. They were amazed because he does everything well. I'll give you an example. Chick-fil-A. Here's a scenario. You pull up to an intersection. It's lunchtime. Everybody's looking for food. There's a McDonald's on this corner, and there's a Chick-fil-A on this corner. They both have a line wrapped around the building. You only have 30 minutes to get back to work. Which line are you getting in? Doesn't even matter if you really want a double quarter pounder with cheese. You know, one of these operations will get this entire line served in the time that the other operation is going to get about 3 or 4 cars served. And I'm not knocking McDonald's, man. I like a McFlurry every now and then. But when you do things well, it makes a difference. You pull up to Chick-fil-A, long line, no sweat. You pull up to McDonald's, Whataburger, James Coney Island, long line? Nope. Where's Chick-fil-A? They do everything well. Jesus did everything well. You know what? As Christians, we're supposed to do things well. We're supposed to do things with a good attitude. We're supposed to do things in a way that is excellent. We're supposed to cross every T and dot every I. We're supposed to be at work on time, leave when we're supposed to, or after we're supposed to. We are supposed to do everything well. Do you want to know how to win in a work situation where it feels like you're set up to lose? Get an excellent spirit on the inside of you. Because I'm going to tell you, your boss is looking for excellence. All your boss wants is somebody who will do everything well. The big stuff and the little stuff. Excellence. They were amazed that Jesus did everything well. And it made them mad at Daniel. He's excelling, he's overcoming, he's winning. He's not supposed to win. He's not one of us. He's supposed to be losing. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." So these guys, they're digging through Daniel's trash. They're trying to find anything. What kind of movies does he watch, right? What kind of books does he read? What does he subscribe to on the internet? They're looking for absolutely everything to find anything against Daniel to stop his meteoric rise from prisoner of war to being over the kingdom of Persia. And the scripture says they can find nothing. How many of us would want private investigators doing a deep dive? Checking bank statements, digging through our trash. Daniel was clean. They worked and they worked and they worked and they worked and could find nothing on. You know what that tells me? He wasn't just excellent in public, he was also excellent in private. I've heard that's a good definition for character, is who you are when nobody else is looking, when nobody else is watching, when you're the only one home, right? When you're the only one with access to your phone. Excellence isn't just public excellence. Having an excellent spirit, winning when you're supposed to lose, isn't just performing well when you're on the field of play. It's not just doing a good job when everybody's around to see it, but it's showing up on time when nobody knows if you'd be late. And it's doing your job to the best of your ability when there's nobody around to pat you on the back and say, "I noticed that." And it's honoring your God and honoring your family and honoring yourself when nobody else would know if you dishonored your God or dishonored your family or dishonored yourself. You want to win when you're set up to lose? Be excellent, and not just excellent publicly, but in your private affairs. Be excellent. Here's another great thing to note, that not every person who succeeds is corrupt. That's what they thought. Well, surely there's some dirt here. He's rising like he is. Oh, there's some dead bodies. There's some skeletons in his closet. And you know, more and more we're living in a day where when people succeed, has to be dirt on them. They have to be terrible to their employees. They have to be bad. Hey, if Jeff Bezos wants to go to space, he's a billionaire and he employs a couple 100,000 people. Let that man go to space. I'm sorry. But here's what I want you to see. Success doesn't equal corruption. Sometimes they succeeded because they had an excellent spirit. And they outworked everybody. And they didn't just work harder, but they did everything well. And they lived it in private. and they found favor. I want you to see the corrupt person is not the one succeeding. The corrupt person in this story is the group of people who's trying to bring down the one who's succeeding. Don't shout me down when I'm preaching good. They didn't want to go be excellent themselves. They didn't want to put in the work to distinguish themselves. It says Daniel distinguished himself. He wasn't distinguished by God. He distinguished himself with an excellent spirit and with faithfulness. These guys didn't want to distinguish. They didn't want to go do the hard work that Daniel did. They didn't want to be excellent publicly and privately. They didn't want to be faithful to their duties and to Daniel's God. They didn't want to do all that. So the easier path was, let's just attack the one who is. Haters. Gonna hate, right? Daniel's done nothing to them but be excellent and be faithful. And it was recognized, and they got mad about it. And so these guys, they come up with a plan. Like, we can't find any dirt, so let's come up with this idea that the king issues a decree that for 30 days no one can worship anyone but the king. And if anyone does, maybe we can, have the king put him to death or something. Oh, what about the lion's den? Yeah, they put him in the lion's den. That sounds great. And so they come up with this plan, and they go to the king. Oh, king, live forever. Kings love hearing how great they are, right? King, we have a great idea. You're a new king. This is a new kingdom. All these folks need to know who's in charge. Why don't we come up with a plan where for the next 30 days, no one can worship anyone but you? King's like, I like that. King, it gets better. And if anybody worships anyone but you for the next 30 days, let's kill them. Let's throw them into the lion's den. King's like, sounds reasonable. Well, king, we have the papers right here. All you need to do, this can turn into a law right now. All you need to do is sign it. King's like, where's my pen? Signs it. And watch this. Here's where Daniel's faithfulness comes in. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, so it's signed, it's law, it's done. He went home to his upstairs room where the windows open toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God. And these last few words are really important. Just as he had done before. We said Daniel succeeds no matter the circumstances. It's the story of Daniel's life, succeeding when he's not supposed to succeed. And we get a window into why right now. Because circumstances did not affect his faithfulness. He was faithful no matter what. When he was a kid in Judah, he was taught faithfulness by somebody. And when he became a slave and a prisoner in Babylon, he was faithful to his God. And when Darius and Cyrus took over and now he's an official in the Persian Empire, he's still what? Faithful to his God. Circumstances did not affect his faithfulness. His life was always changing. His worship never was. His circumstances were always different. His worship was routine. 3 times a day, no matter how busy, no matter what was going on, no matter how much stress, no matter if it was against the dang law, Daniel went home. He looked toward the city that he was born in, and he prayed. He gave thanks to God, and he asked God for help, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group, and they found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about this royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, pause. The decree is just for 30 days. This is how excellent and faithful Daniel was. Even his enemies knew it doesn't have to go on forever. Let's just a short time period, 30 days, and we're going to catch Daniel. Because Daniel's not taking a week off. Daniel's not taking a month off, even if it's illegal. You see that? Man, what about if your haters know how excellent and faithful you are? Anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den. The king answered, the decree stands. He's still loving it. He still thinks it's a good idea, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. Everybody knew he did it. They're saying Daniel's still doing what he always does. And when the king heard this, he understands why these guys came to him in the first place. They were trying to trap Daniel, and it worked. Because, and this was kind of a common thing back then, if a king made a decree, even the king couldn't take it back. And so the king hears this, he understands where the plan came from, and he's greatly distressed. And he was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Let me just say this, faithfulness is greater than scheming. Everybody's scheming in this story. Everybody, the men who hate Daniel are plotting and scheming, and now the king is plotting and scheming. They're scheming how to hurt Daniel. He's scheming how to save Daniel. None of it goes anywhere. The only person not scheming in this story is Daniel. I don't know if you've noticed, Daniel hasn't even said anything to anybody but God in this whole story. He's not running around pleading his case. He's not explaining why or the what's. He's going to God, giving thanks to God, asking God for help. He's not getting involved in the mess. He's not scheming. He's not plotting either for himself or against himself. Listen to me. Faithfulness is greater than scheming. If you're faithful to your God, faithful to your duties, faithful to your family, you won't have to scheme your way out of trouble. You won't have to scheme your way through the next set of problems. Faithfulness will do what scheming cannot. You don't have to be a better schemer than the next man. You just need to be a faithful man or woman of God. And watch what God will do in and through your life. Daniel doesn't have time to scheme. He's faithful to God, praying 3 times a day. He's faithful to his duties, working hard, excelling, running the kingdom. He doesn't have time for the petty. He's busy. He's faithful. He's doing his thing, running the country, giving thanks to God. No wonder he was excelling over everybody else. They spend their whole 40 hours trying to figure out how to bring him down. He spends his week running the kingdom and asking God for help. And again, they don't want to do what he's doing. That's bringing him the success it's bringing him. They'd rather plot and scheme and bring him down to make themselves feel better. Don't shout me down. And so Daniel winds up in the pit. The men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, I love that, continually, faithfully. You know what continually means? All the time. Paul said, pray without ceasing. All the time. continually, faithfully. That means when you want to and when you don't want to, you're faithful. That means when it's easy and when it's not easy, you're faithful. That means when the wind's with you and when the wind's against you, you're faithful. Continually, continually. When you feel like God hears every word you pray and when you feel like nobody's listening to what you say, continually, faithfully. When you get the miracle and when you don't get the miracle. When you get the money and when you don't get the money. When you feel better and when you don't feel better. When you get the healing and when you don't get the healing. When you're standing at the altar and when you're standing at the cemetery. Continually, continually, continually. God, I serve you continually, every day, always, no matter what else is going on. Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually. Everybody, including the king, knew Daniel is faithful. Always. He's faithful. Has your God, whom you serve continually, rescued you? I hope he does. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own ring, with the king's ring of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation may not be changed. Watch this. King's so upset about this. He returns to his palace and spends the night without eating, without entertainment, and he couldn't sleep. So at the first light of dawn, as soon as the night's over, the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, expecting no response. Daniel, servant of the living God. He didn't even know God's done anything yet. But Daniel's faithfulness was enough for him to know Daniel's God is different than my God's. There's more to Daniel's gods than my. He doesn't know if Daniel's alive or dead, but Daniel's excellent spirit and Daniel's faithfulness has been a testament to this king that Daniel's God is alive. Has your God, whom you serve, continually been able to rescue you from the lions? He's expecting no response. But Daniel answers, may the king live forever. What? Not only is he alive, he's still honoring the king. He's still... And he tells what happened. I'm sure Darius is stunned. Oh my God. He says, my God sent his angel and he shut the mouths of the lions. They haven't hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight. Pause. There's two reasons God protected Daniel in the pit. The first reason is right there, Daniel 6:22. He says, they haven't hurt me because I was found innocent. I was blameless in his sight. God knew that what they accused me of evil or whatever, it wasn't true about me, and he saved me because I was innocent. Let me just make a connection here. Innocence is the result of an excellent spirit. If you're excellent and you cross all your T's and you dot all your I's and you take care of business the way it's supposed to be taken care of, then there will not be room for people to accuse you of anything else. He says, I was saved because I was innocent. I almost told a story that would have been telling too much, and I'm not going to. Yes, I am. Pastor Steve used to tell somebody around here, hey, what you keep getting accused of, I don't get accused of, ever. Do you know why? Because I don't put myself in that situation. And you keep putting yourself in that situation. Excellent people don't put themselves in a position to be blamed for anything. They're excellent. They do everything well. They do everything appropriately. They do everything well. He says, so they didn't harm me because I was innocent. And I was innocent because I have an excellent spirit. That's my connection, not Daniel's. But do you see the connection? Right? So he says, they haven't harmed me because I was innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. I'm just worshiping my God. I'm not doing anything bad to you. God knows it. You know it. So the king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the pit. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, No wound was found on him. Here's the second reason God protected him: because he trusted in his God. Do you know where trust comes from? Trust is the result of faithfulness. Trust is learned by being faithful in your spiritual disciplines. Trust is learned by worshiping God continually. Because when you know how to worship God in good and bad times, you're learning how to trust God in good and bad times. So when it gets really bad, you won't have to learn trust then. You ever heard those stories about people who I read a story this week about a 16-year-old girl. Her dad was out working underneath his car in the driveway. She hears a crash, runs outside. The car's falling on top of her dad. 16-year-old girl. She lifts the car off of her dad so he can ease out. She's thinking he's dying. Lifts the car off of her dad. Car's on fire for some reason. Go read the story. Car's on fire. She jumps in the driver's seat, drives the car on 3 wheels away from the house, jumps out of the car, gets back to her dad. The car blows up in the street. Like, this is something out of a movie. How does a 16-year-old girl who's not a superhero lift a car? And then how does she know in that moment get it out of the... What I'm saying is when trouble comes, it's too late to learn how to be strong. When trouble comes, it's either learned already or it's not. It's either in you or it's not. And we learn how to be strong by being faithful. We learn how to trust by being faithful. So when the devil comes, when the pit comes, when the lions come, when the schemers come, you don't learn to be strong then, you learn to be strong now. So he protected him because he was innocent, and he was innocent because he did everything well. And he protected him because he trusted his God, and he knew how to trust God because he was continually faithful to his God. But there was some good that came from the pit. Daniel 6:24, at the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. Pause. I said good that came from the pit. Wasn't good for them. But let me just stop and say, you don't have to take your energy to deal with your haters. Just keep being excellent. Just keep being faithful. And if you're not excellent and faithful, get an excellent spirit and learn how to be faithful. Faithfulness is greater than scheming. People who plot on you end up hurting themselves anyway. Don't give them any energy. Cost themselves, cost their families. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Daniel wasn't saved because the lions weren't hungry. Lions were hungry. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, may you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. And then the last verse in Daniel 6 says, and Daniel prospered in the Persian Empire. He prospered during the reign of Darius and during the reign of Cyrus the Persian. I want to show you 3 quick things and then we're out of here. The first thing is, after the pit, Daniel's enemies were punished. Don't give your enemies any attention. Keep being faithful. Keep having an excellent spirit. Keep doing what God's called you to do, right? Do your thing. Don't worry about what they're doing. You want to win when you're supposed to lose? Worry about you and what God's called you to do and leave them alone. The second thing is Daniel prospers. Daniel prospers. He's in his 80s and yet he prospers. He's in maybe the greatest struggle of his life, and yet he prospers. Trouble makes us stronger. Trouble makes us better. Trouble teaches us how to trust. If you're facing a lion's den right now, just know it doesn't mean that on the other side you won't prosper. No, there's prosperity on the other side of trouble if you learn the lessons from the trouble. So the enemies are punished, Daniel prospers, and watch this, God gets glorified. And here's what we see. Here's what we see. This story wasn't really about Daniel after all. This was a story about God. And so the summation is not, hey, look how great Daniel is. No. The summation by the king to the world is, look how great God is. And what he says essentially, and this is what I want you to see and remember, you want to know how to win when you're supposed to lose, remember this about God. Number one, God lives. God is alive. He is active. He gets involved in our life. You can go to him and ask him for help just like Daniel did. God lives. Number two, God reigns. There's nothing more powerful on the face of the earth than the God that you know and the God who loves you. God is sovereign. His kingdom is eternal. He reigns. Your boss is not greater than your God. Your employees are not greater than your God. Your situation, your diagnosis is not greater than your God. Your God lives and your God reigns. And watch this, your God rescues. He is a rescuing God. He is a saving God. He doesn't leave us in the pit. He doesn't leave us in the den with the lions. No, God is a rescuing God. Not only is he alive, not only does he reign, but he uses his life and he uses his power to save us from the opposition. Hey, you can remain standing. About 13 years ago, it was the pits around here. It was rough. Some of y'all been around. Because of some general contractor stuff, we were paying a whole lot more for this building and land than we had bargained for. And because of a death in my family, I became the preacher, 2008, to tell you about my great success. January 2008, church has about 600-700 people. Pastor Steve took a year off to grieve the death of his firstborn son. So I stepped in and I grew this church from 700 down to 300. I was an amazing leader, phenomenal communicator. And if it was hard to pay the bills with 700, it was impossible to pay the bills with 300 folks coming. So we had to respond. We all stopped taking paychecks. We all moved in together. And for 3 years, did everything we could. Scrapped, fought, prayed, begged God for help, begged y'all for money. And right when it looked like this thing was done, it was over. God stepped in. Financially. It was a Saturday, December 31st, 2011. We got a check, $4.5 million, y'all. We owed $4.2 million. I got a check, $4.5 million. But I want you to see how close it was. Sunday morning, January 1st, 2012, Pastor Steve stands up here and he tells y'all, we got a check for it. My God. And everybody knew at that point it was the pits. We were all there together. Because the folks that stuck, they knew. We weren't shy about sharing. So we had a big celebration that Sunday. I still got the video on DVD in the office. That's a remarkable Sunday in my life. On Monday, January 2nd, we got a letter from the mortgage company. They must have mailed it on Friday. The day before we got our miracle. Foreclosure notice. be out of that building, be off that property in 30 days. What a call that was to make. I think Margaret made it. Hey, not only will you not foreclose, but we're going to pay this note off. And do you know what I know? You can't tell me any different. You cannot tell me. God lives. God is alive. God's got his eyes on you. God is watching you. God knows what's going on. God is aware. God lives. God reigns. No matter what the enemy's telling you, no matter what you got in the mail or what you heard in that doctor's office, God reigns. God is greater. God is more powerful. God's dominion never ends. It's never superseded. God lives. God reigns. And when we need it the most, God rescues. God reaches down with his mighty hand and says, I won't let them take what you've built. I won't let them take your life. I won't let them take your marriage. I won't let them take your family. God is a rescuing God. I don't know what you're facing right now, but you need to remember that God is alive, that God is powerful, and God can save you. Why don't you throw your hands up right there where you are and say, God, I need you to rescue me in this situation. What is it? What is it? Remind yourself, God is alive. I don't know what obstacle you're facing, but God is alive. God is aware. God knows about it. God hasn't forgotten about you. He's alive. He reigns. He's greater than the enemy is. He's greater than the lions are. He's greater than the haters are. What are you facing right now? God reigns. You need to know that. Magnify God in your life. Make him bigger in your life. And do you have faith that he can rescue you?